There are objects people collect, there are objects people fear, and then there are objects that should never be touched. This is the story of one such object. Outside, the night was cold and wet. The wind rushed fiercely through the trees, and the rain beat steadily against the windows of Labanam Villa. Inside, the fire burned brightly, filling the room with warmth and comfort. Mr. White and his son Herbert sat over a game of chess. Mr. White, impatient and distracted by the storm outside, made a reckless move. "Hark at the wind," he said. Herbert smiled as he studied the board. "Check." Mr. White frowned, realizing his mistake. Mrs. White looked up from her knitting with quiet amusement as the peaceful evening continued, unaware that it would soon be interrupted by a visitor carrying a story unlike any they had ever heard. A gate banged loudly, and the sound of heavy footsteps struggled against the wind. "That is Morris," said Mr. White. He rose quickly and opened the front door. Sergeant Major Morris entered, a tall, heavily built man with a ruddy face and watchful eyes. The newcomer shook hands with each member of the family before settling near the fire. The sergeant major had seen much of the world, and after the first greetings were over, he spoke of distant lands and strange peoples he had encountered during his years in India. The Whites listened with growing fascination as Morris described unfamiliar customs, dangerous journeys, and remarkable adventures. Mr. White watched his old friend with admiration. 21 years of it," said the sergeant major thoughtfully. There was a silence. Then, as though remembering something he would rather have forgotten, Morris slowly reached into the pocket of his coat. Slowly, Sergeant Major Morris drew a small object from his pocket. It was nothing more than a dried monkey's paw, brown, shriveled, and twisted with age. He held it out silently. Herbert leaned forward with curiosity, while Mrs. White looked at it with puzzled amusement. Mr. White took the paw into his hand and turned it over carefully. "What is there special about it?" he inquired. The sergeant major answered quietly. "It had a spell put on it by an old fakir, a very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow." Morris paused before continuing. "The spell gave 3 separate men 3 wishes each." "Sounds like the Arabian Nights," said Herbert as he rose and crossed to the fireplace. Morris shook his head. "If you don't want it," said Mr. White, "give it to me." The sergeant major looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know what the first man's first 2 wishes were," he said quietly, "but the third was for death." Without another word, Morris suddenly threw the monkey's paw into the fire. Mr. White cried out and quickly stooped, snatching it back from the burning coals. Morris watched him gravely. "Better let it burn," he said. "If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens." At the gate, he paused once more. "If you must wish," he said quietly, "wish for something sensible." After Morris had gone, the room grew cheerful again. Herbert laughed. "Well, why don't you wish for £200, father?" Mr. White smiled at the joke. He took the monkey's paw from his pocket and held it up. "I wish for £200. At that instant, Mr. White gave a sudden cry. "It moved," he whispered. "It twisted in my hand like a snake." Herbert laughed uneasily. "I expect you'll find the money tied up in a great big bag in the middle of your bed," he said, "and something horrible squatting on top of the wardrobe, watching you as you pocket your ill-gotten gains." Mr. White smiled, though he could not entirely forget the strange movement he had felt. The next morning, Herbert left early for work at Moore and Megan's. Before leaving, he laughed once more about the wish and wished his parents good morning. The day passed quietly. Then, during the afternoon, Mrs. White noticed a stranger standing uncertainly outside the house. He seemed unwilling to approach. At last, he slowly walked toward the front door. He seemed undecided, walking a few steps toward the gate before stopping again. At last, he gathered his courage and knocked. Mr. White opened the door and invited him inside. The visitor introduced himself. "I was asked to call from Moore and Megan's." Mrs. White smiled politely. "Is anything the matter?" The man hesitated. His eyes fell to the floor. "I'm sorry. Herbert has been hurt." Mrs. White clasped her hands together. "Hurt? Is he badly hurt?" For one brief moment, hope still remained. The visitor swallowed hard. He was caught in the machinery. No one spoke. The words seemed to hang motionless in the room. Then he added quietly, "He was the only one left to us." Mrs. White stared at him without understanding. Mr. White slowly reached out and placed a trembling hand upon his wife's shoulder. At last, the terrible truth became clear. Herbert was dead. The representative continued softly, "Moore and Meggins disclaim all responsibility, but they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation." Mr. White looked up. His lips barely moved. "How much?" The visitor answered, £200. If you enjoy timeless stories brought to life through immersive storytelling, consider subscribing. There are many more stories waiting to be explored.